Stop her!
Hello and welcome my friends to another Saturday morning arcade. I am Savino as always, and today we start a new season here on The Flying Kick, where we will talk about the games from 1989. This was an awesome year for the genre with numerous amazing and genre-defining games released, but sure, not all games were that great since some still were bound to some bad habits from the past. Today we will take a look at one of those not so great games, but hold on to your baseball bats because the year is just starting. Developed by SunSoft, Tough Turf was released in January of 1989. The first beat-em up from this company, Tough Turf is a pretty run-of-the-mill game that was received with little to no fanfare. In some ways, I could even say Tough Turf is a forgotten game, since after extensive research trying to find more information about it, I returned almost empty-handed. There's barely any information about it on the web, and even the release date is debatable. From what I found, the game was released on January 11th in Japan and in March in the USA. But this USA date is pretty debatable, with the only mention of it being found at IMDb, not really my go-to place for game information. Tough Turf was developed in conjunction with Sega, but the House of Sonic didn't have anything to do with the software development, being responsible only for providing the hardware, the Sega System 610, which was the board where many of the Sega classics were developed. And you can see this is not a game from Sega because, as I said, this one is pretty mundane. Starting with the story, you have nothing. Well, you have a skeleton of a story here, but you will only find out about it if you beat the game. Not even on the game's flyer you will find a hint of what's going on. All you will learn when starting the game is that you are a well-dressed dude beating punks on the street after jumping from the back of a truck. Why you were dressed like an office worker inside the truck's trunk is anyone's guess, but that's all you have to work with. Maybe the devs wanted you to create your own story, or maybe they simply didn't care enough, which sounds more like it. My guess is they wanted to do something akin to Double Dragon, but for some reason they quit it midway. But no matter the reason, one thing is very clear here. After beating the story, you will be more confused than when you started. You see, by the end of the 7th level, you will find that you are trying to rescue a chick. Of course, as an avid beaten-up player, you will assume she's your girlfriend. The thing is, after rescuing her, and here I want to note how beefed she looks, she turns around and punches you in the face. Yeah, I was pretty surprised too. After all the work you went through to save her, or maybe you just interrupted some weird roleplay she and the final boss were having, so I'd rather move on. After taking the punch, you have no option other than to escalate things and duel to the death with her. Honestly, I really don't know what the devs were trying to say or what I should do with this information, but the thing is, this is easily the weirdest beaten-up story, or lack thereof, so far. Even weirder than Ninja Gaiden, where the bad guy was addicted to tropes from 80s action movies. When it comes to the graphics, yeah, even for 1989 this game looks pretty bad. Right from the start you can notice an excessive prevalence of bronze on your screen. You'd better get used to it, since this is the color that you see the most throughout the 8 levels of this game. The other is gray. Tough Turf is a pretty boring game to look at thanks to the lack of variety in the backgrounds and how washed and grainy everything looks. The world lacks detail, and the parts that should have been more detailed are just a mess of pixels, making it impossible to distinguish what was supposed to be there. Like this factory here. I mean, there are tons of machines in the background, but trying to make sense of this mess of gray pixels is asking too much. To be fair, they tried to make things a bit more interesting here, with levels being all interconnected like we saw in Double Dragon, but differently from that game, the screen doesn't pan to the right showing you the new level. Here you just fade in and out to the next, but at least there is a bit of coherence here. The characters, both the heroes and villains, are also nothing to write home about. The playable characters are just what I described before, a white-collar worker that you wouldn't bat an eye at on the street. Compared to previous games where your character usually had striking colors or at least appeared unique enough, here the hero looks like a boring dude who wants to compare his spreadsheets with yours. Your enemies are a bit more fitting to the setting, all 6 of them. Aside from looking boring, Tough Turf also has little to no variety when it comes to the enemies. Their design isn't so bad, I mean, you can't go wrong with 80s punks and a couple of street buns, but there is so little variation that after the 3rd level, you probably have seen them all and are already tired of them. There are some palette swapped characters here, but with such boring and uninspired colors, these changes make no real difference. I think the most exciting thing to see here is the molten metal on level 5 and the timid parallax scrolling on the last level, because other than that, I don't think there's anything here worth looking at. Aside from being boring to look at, Tough Turf is also boring to listen to. Right from the start, you'll be hailed by a muffled announcer saying, "Come on, punk, let's go!" who will repeat himself often in the game. But despite being muffled, the voice is comprehensible enough, which is more than what many games from the same era achieved. The sounds of her attacks are not horrible, but for reasons we will discuss later, you will rarely hear them. What you hear a lot is the sound of your weapons hitting the enemies, and while they also aren't that bad, it has no variation no matter which weapon you're carrying. The problem with Tough Turf sound design is the same as the enemies, the lack of any variation. Your attacks, the sound of objects falling, then the grunt your character does every time he's knocked down will soon start to annoy you a bit. The only variation you will find here is the grunt of your enemies. Each type of enemy has a different scream, but since the variety here is basically non-existent, you will hear the same moment a lot. Now, the music is another story. Yes, like the rest of the game, the tunes here don't sound great, but the compositions are pretty good. I mean, this is not Double Dragon level of good, but the tunes are pretty upbeat and have enough energy to them. It's a shame the sound quality is so low because the Sega System 16 was capable of better sounds than this. Maybe SunSoft's lack of experience with the Sega System 16 can explain why everything sounded so primitive here, but one thing is for sure, it wasn't a lack of experience with the board that made the gameplay so freaking boring. To say Tough Turf was inspired by Double Dragon is an understatement. This game was desperately trying to be a sequel to Double Dragon, even though the real sequel was already out and was way better than this game. Here you play a nameless dude trying to save a nameless girl from a nameless gang in a nameless city. The game has 7 levels plus an extra level after you beat the final boss. The arcade came with a 3-button layout, and just like Double Dragon, you can punch, kick and jump. But Tough Turf wanted to make things more complicated for no reason whatsoever. Here, to unleash your flying kick, instead of pressing jump and then kick, you have to press both together. I mean, the controls are responsive enough, there's no complaint about that, but making something more complicated just for the sake of it baffles me a little. And it doesn't stop here. To grab any weapon on the floor, you must press kick and punch at the same time. I mean, I like when you have a dedicated button to pick things up. Heavens know how many times I was trying to beat an enemy just to take a beating because my character decided that this was the best time to pick up a random coin. But unless you have access to the game's flyer, you would never guess how you grab anything. And you will need to grab these weapons. Differently from any beat'em up released so far, Tough Turf has a big focus on weapons. It doesn't have a huge variety, which is expected, nothing in this game has, but without them you won't go very far. The main problem is that your attacks lack reach, and a lot of enemies will spawn carrying pipes or clubs, leaving you at a huge disadvantage. Sometimes fighting with your bare hands can be faster since you can easily stunlock your enemies, but more often than not, someone will sneak behind you and hit you from the back. You will also see enemies carrying knives and broken bottles, but you can't use these. The knives will disappear moments after hitting the ground and the bottles will break, rendering them unusable. In the end, you have only one weapon you can use because both pipes and clubs are basically the same weapon with a different skin. On the bright side, the weapons are always visible in the game, never disappearing even after being knocked out from your hands. And that's the whole thing with this game. You walk until you meet your enemies, swing your weapon a little bit and proceed to the next arena. There's absolutely nothing interesting to see here, not even in the background. Sure, sometimes you will find a conveyor belt in the best Double Dragon style where you can trick your enemies, but other than that, swinging the club is all you will be doing for around 40 minutes. There is even some long stretches of absolutely nothing in most levels to give you time to regret your life choices. Tough Turf also tries, unsuccessfully, to make your life as difficult as possible. The game doesn't offer a single health replenish, and when changing levels, only 2 of your 8 life blocks will be refilled. Considering the game gives you only 1 life and no chance of getting more, this sounds pretty cheap. This choice might have something to do with the game's difficulty, which for an arcade game is pretty easy. Your enemies aren't smart. You can easily trick them into a corner where you can take them one by one without much they can do about it, so that may explain why the game gives you no extra lives or food. You can easily beat this game with 2 or 3 credits, so if you had 2 or 3 lives per credit, it would be 1 CC for all. Of course, there are moments when you can be caught in the middle of a group of enemies and there will be little you can do to avoid certain death, but these moments will only happen if you make a series of bad decisions. Or get too distracted since your enemies are so predictable that boredom will probably be your worst foe here. The only thing this game truly innovated was the weapons drop mechanic, which you can do by pressing the 3 buttons at the same time. While there is no real reason for you to do that, it was an interesting addition that only a few games have made use since 1989. Talk about being forgettable, your only contribution to the genre was never really adopted. Overall, Tough Turf is a pretty boring game. Back in the day, I doubt there was any reason to play it, even considering there were only 6 other beat'em ups to compete with it. The graphics are bad, the gameplay is boring, and the main character looks like your uncle who was always complaining about work. I don't see why a kid with a few changes in his pocket would prefer this over Ninja Gaiden, Double Dragon, or even Dynamite Ducks. And considering what was about to come next, it's no surprise that this game was so quickly dismissed and later forgotten. Oh, and before I forget, this asymmetrical UI looks awful. Tough Turf never received any ports for the console at the time, or even for modern consoles. Even the guys at Hamster who published some pretty obscure arcade games seem to have forgotten about this one. If you really want to play it, and I really don't know how you would, the only way is through emulation, but honestly, unless your goal is to play every beat'em up ever, I recommend that you stay far from this one. Otherwise, this will be 40 minutes you will never get back. And that's it for the video, folks. We can say 1989 had a pretty rough start, but things were about to get way better than they ever were. Don't miss next time, we will be talking about a game that changed everything and revolutionized the genre. If you reached this far in the video, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more beaten up things in your life. I will see you all tomorrow, where we will have a long talk about Neketsu Oyako, but until then, I hope you all have an awesome day, and remember, keep beaten up.